Running?
Yeah.
Happy?
Speed.
Is just tell me a little bit about what your job is at the University of Brighton.
So I'm a principal lecturer in e-commerce and digital marketing, which is how we characterise what the internet is in business. More broadly, what I'm really interested in is how the internet changes the way we live our lives. For business purposes, that's mostly about digital marketing at the moment. So people really need and want to know, how do I use social media to build useful links and to understand what people want from products, services. So it's very much in a business context.
Brilliant. And before you did that, what did you used to do?
So I went to university quite late in life, which was really lucky for me. I went to university from 93 to 96, and that was when the World Wide Web was invented. So I went in thinking I'd be a software developer. I came out finding that the World Wide Web was what people needed to know how to use. So I built websites for game companies, for TV companies. There was a television programme called the Computer Channel. In fact, there was a whole channel in the early days of multi-channel broadcast in the UK, and I built the website for that and for various publishers, which was really enjoyable, bringing together kind of content with technical access, trying to make it easy for people to read or watch clips from TV programmes in the mid-90s.
What were the drawbacks of that?
Everyone's internet connection was slow, so streaming video was something that seemed very sexy if you were in the workplace, if you were trying it out on your own computer, but actually for people with dial-up modems, which was how people used to connect to the internet then, it was painfully slow to watch anything more than a few seconds. I can remember the trailer for the movie Pulp Fiction being an early internet success, and yet it was about 15 seconds long and it took about 45 minutes to download.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? But we persevered with it.
Yeah, I mean it felt really exciting when I can remember watching that John Travolta trailer at home from Pulp Fiction, and this is amazing to be able to watch this American movie, 15 seconds of it, on my PC at home. And we did persevere with it, so people went on thinking it would really change their experience of media. Gamers were early adopters of that, so games like Doom and Quake, you could play with people right the way across the planet over a dial-up modem, and sometimes it was a bit slow and you might get killed by the enemy, but it was really exciting, this sense of being able to jump into a world and share it with people who you didn't know who were on the other side of the planet. Yeah, I think there was a real sense of, all through that birth of network technology that was the 90s, that it was like, this is so amazing, even though it perhaps doesn't quite work yet.
What drives that, do you think?
I think that the combination of things that look like the experience of looking at things that look like professional productions, like television programmes, but being able to control them is very exciting, perhaps particularly for a generation that have grown up thinking that's how the world should be. So I can remember as a child watching Mr. Spock with his tricorder on Star Trek and thinking, this is how the future will be, that we'll have a little box that we can look at and it will tell us how the world works. And so with a lot of the technologies that people are using, they may not be quite ready for the market. So at the moment people are saying that virtual reality will be the big next thing, and for myself it looks too uncomfortable to put a box on my head. But maybe for children who are thinking, what's this like to go into this other world, it drives a kind of sense of excitement and possibility.
It's quite playful as well, isn't it? I mean, play definitely is one of the drivers of all of these things, isn't it?
Yeah, I think play is really important, the sort of the sense of entertainment and being wrapped up and caught up in things. I mean, when there only used to be 2 or 3 channels on television, it would be a matter of moving backwards and forwards between sometimes the least dull programme available. Whereas if we can jump, channel surf, web surf, or go into an immersive game, people like to sort of play with and be rewarded by getting to use technology and finding things that distract them and entertain them.
And you don't even have to get off the sofa to change the channel anymore. I mean,
Well,
yeah.
that's been around for a few years.
I know, but I can remember televisions without remote control. Remote
Yeah.
controls when they came in was really fun.
Was amazing, and the idea of who held the control and swapped back and forth between the channels was almost a generational divide, because now if we're sat in a family with maybe a couple of tablets and everyone hasn't got a tablet looking at their mobile phone while the TV is showing in the background, we're all able to control our own channels in a way that I think if we were thinking about Michael Aldrich's contribution, one of the things that Michael Aldrich understood very early on was that users being able to choose what they looked at rather than just waiting for something to come up on the screen was very empowering. And he understood it in the context of business, but he also had a glimpse of how it might be for ordinary people sat at home using their TV to interact with the world.
Brilliant. And the idea of computers, in the most basic sense, talking to each other, when did that become a because presumably computers were there originally to compute, to do calculations or process data, but the point at which they then might talk to each other, when did that kind of come along?
Well, the idea that computers could talk to each other has been something that's been important for a very long time. So to give you a slight diversion,
Yeah.
in the 1950s, throughout the United Kingdom, there used to be something called the Lions Tea House chain, which was sort of the McDonald's of its era. And the management of the tens of thousands of pounds of sugar and tea and freshly made sandwiches and cakes that had to be distributed throughout the country was one of the first times that computers were used to do business processes. The Leo, or the Lions Electronic Office, was the first ever business computer in the world, and it didn't talk to other computers, but it was entirely dependent on the people who ran the tea shops telephoning up each morning and reading out a series of codes that were what the stock was that was needed for each individual tea house for that day. This idea that computers are only really useful if you can get data into them from somewhere else, that's been a problem for a long time. And so in the 1960s, when the internet was first being thought about, that was the big goal, was to have one computer talk to another, to share the resources and to share the information. In the business world, I think the late 1970s, when Michael Aldrich was developing his first systems, was an era where people were realising how achievable it was, that if we had a computer in an office and another computer in another location, it could be linked, although back then it was by telephone lines and pretty slow and pretty cumbersome.
But it could be done.
But it could be done, yes. And I guess that really is what made the internet such a potent force when it got deregulated and made available to the public in the early 90s, was that there it was, something that let computers talk to each other. So in the first flash of home computing in Britain, when the BBC Micro was being distributed throughout schools in the country, there were bulletin boards. People used to be able to use the BBC Micro to connect somewhere where other computers talk to each other, but there were very few of them. There was very little information. The games were very slow and text-based, and this idea that computers could share big amounts of data, the internet really changed that for us all.
Yeah. And at what point was it, or tell me about the point at which sort of ordinary people could use computers? Because the way you just described the people in the Lions Tea House, they had to read out the language that the computer understood, presumably.
Yes.
But at which point, that was a sort of important shift, isn't it, where people don't have to speak computers' language, but computers speak our language, as it
Yeah.
were.
No,
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So there's been some really big and important changes through the years about the model of how we talk to computers, the idea of what the computer expects to receive from a user. So with the Lions Tea House, the people placing their orders read out a number of codes that equated to how many pounds of tea or sugar they needed. In the late 1960s, a group of acid-taking scientists on the west coast of America began to think about the playful opportunities for computers, and particularly Doug Engelbert came up with the idea of the mouse, which was an incredibly intuitive way of moving a pointer around a screen. Before that, one had to type in coordinates on a screen to identify where we were looking at. And for nearly about 30 years, the mouse was the most intuitive way of talking to a computer and as a normal person choosing things from the computer. It wasn't always available, so we had alternatives like with like text menus. So Michael Aldrich's innovative shopping system used lists of goods with numbers beside them. The user would type in a number in order to select something. And really, the mouse and the list, what's sometimes known as the WIMP environment, the Windows interface, mouse and pointer, was known as the WIMP environment, and it was absolutely revolutionary when Engelbert invented it in the late 60s, and it really was the most important way of interacting with computers until the touch screen. So when the tablet became a widely available product, that's when the access to computer powers really opened up to people very young and maybe rather older who hadn't been able to deal with a computer interface.
Brilliant. Are we all right with that falling down, Mark? Has that made any difference?
No, it's just
okay, fine.
There's a siren about to...
We'll wait for some. That's all amazing. You're doing an amazing job.
Thank
you very much.
You did say waffle.
Waffle is fab.
Yeah.
Okay,
we might need to fact check Doug. He might be called Engelhart, he might be called Engelbert.
I'll check that out. I'll check that out.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Should have checked, but I don't know. I normally have my mobile phone open in my hand when I'm lecturing, and I say to my students, this is the way to understand the world, is to not try and remember it all, but look it up. So I also realise I haven't muted my phone, so I might as well do that as I've mentioned it, and we're in a pause for a second.
Do you need to fact check that?
No, it's fine. No, we're good. So I was just going to read you something that I pulled from the Michael Aldrich book, which says, videotex may well be seen by historians as the watershed in the development of television usage and technology. For 40 years, television has been classed as a home entertainment medium, and a structure of industries has been erected to support this perception. If television is now no longer just a home entertainment medium, what will it become, and how will its new persona impact the industrial structure so carefully constructed over so many years? But what I thought was interesting about that is he sort of really thought the telly would be the thing, didn't he?
Yes,
and
he
it
did.
Kind of he couldn't predict the smartphone or the iPad.
Although I could respond two ways to that.
Yes.
So one of them is he was so right. He was absolutely right. He understood that there was a paradigm shift between a world of mass media broadcast where people made content, deliberately scheduled it, and then released it to an audience who passively consumed it. That was the world in which Michael Aldrich was thinking about what could be different about the way that we use the television. That was the device at the time that we all sat and looked at, and he recognised that there was a fundamental shift going on. He wasn't alone. Thinkers like Alvin Toffler, with his predictions for the third wave, were talking about how important home working, teleworking and multi-channel choice would be. But Aldrich really understood that simple interfaces would be a way that people could say, it's not just a matter of changing the channel. I can select a goods, a product I want, I can select a piece of information I want to retrieve, possibly I can book a flight on an aeroplane, or place an order with a company. So on one level, Aldrich was absolutely spot on in what he saw the television change that the connection between television and computer brought about. In another way, of course, he was, as with many pioneers, looking at what was in his world at the time and not necessarily thinking about all the possible physical manifestations, the ways that we might carry information technology around with us. So the mobile phone was something that looked more like science fiction in the 1970s. The idea that we could hold in our hands something that would give us access to all the information pretty well in the world. So he picked the television almost as a metaphor, I think, for the window into interaction, the window into choice, that he was so right about seeing was changing fundamentally at the end of the 1970s.
So he was right about what we would do, but he was wrong about how the means by which we would do it.
Absolutely.
Maybe just put that into a soundbite for me.
Yes. So Michael's ideas about how we would interact with content was absolutely what has become the world we all live in now. His choice of the television set in the corner of the room was related to the technology that was available, and in that sense it wasn't the television, as we all know now. The computer and later the smartphone were the ways that we would do it.
Amazing. Thank you very much. That was perfect. So this is a bit techie, which we may or may not go to help with, but what was videotex? What was the Prestel, CFAX? If you could sort of, for the uninitiated, what was it?
I'm just trying to remember how it. It doesn't have to be a very techie answer,
No,
but
not very techie answer.
But understanding what, not saying something completely wrong. I do know something about it.
Okay.
So ask me again, please.
How did Prestel work, or videotex work? What was it?
Prestel was a sort of intermediate technology, a technology limited by the way that television at the time worked. So almost all the information that came into our televisions came in one direction, and Prestel was a chance to send a little bit of a signal back to the systems that Michael Aldrich was thinking we might interact with. So it was lists. It would be a list of choices, it would be a list of news headlines or weather forecasts, or even options in a quiz game, whereby picking a number on your remote control, the user could say back to the television, and through the television back to perhaps a remote computer, I want to order some currant buns from Greggs today. It was a two-way system, but based just on choosing a number from a list.
Perfect. And it was it was the early days of sort of travel agents and that sort of thing, and banking. It was quite an established sort of system in the business world, wasn't it? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, so very quickly, between the 1950s, when the Leo Lyons electronic office was first invented, and the late 70s, business recognised the power of computing, and many businesses moved management of things like stock and sales and orders onto computer systems. During the 1970s, the first attempts to link computers up for business processes were really set in place. Initially, very big corporations would pay very high costs to have lines that literally electronically linked different buildings together. And by the late 1970s, when Michael Aldrich was coming up with his really innovative business systems, this could be done at a level where a travel agent on the high street could have a terminal that could access what flights were available, what seats were available on flights, using the telephone system to carry the data between computers.
Brilliant. So we're now going to get a little bit into the Mrs. Snowball and her online. Have you ever seen the
I have, yeah,
clip?
yeah,
It's good, isn't it?
It's lovely. Yes.
It takes you right back to a kind of front room of the time.
I saw it when Michael came and spoke to me and colleagues at the business school, did a sort of
Oh,
presentation where he played it and then talked about it.
How brilliant.
So although I don't really know him, I have heard Michael talk in a small group about that video clip. Yeah.
So, just quite briefly, because obviously we're talking to Luke Aldrich tomorrow, I think. Yeah, tomorrow. Tell me just a little bit. I mean, it wasn't called online shopping. The word online presumably didn't exist in those days.
Can you remember what it was called?
I've absolutely no idea.
No, I don't know. I mean,
it was like a shopping,
probably
teleshopping.
Teleshopping. I think. I was just wondering whether in that clip there was a word used.
I don't
can't
think
remember.
so.
No, I don't think there is. Yeah.
I mean, it hadn't. I mean, maybe just tell us that online shopping hadn't been invented then.
Yeah, that's a good thing to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Mrs. Snowball and Michael's buying her buns from Greggs or whatever, with a remote control. Tell me a little bit about that.
So one of Michael's really unique contributions, really innovative ideas, was realising that the kinds of systems that were being trialled in business for linking different computers together could make it into the home. And he was a visionary in that sense, recognising that individual consumers could choose what they watched, interact with it, or even do online shopping. It wasn't called online shopping then, but it really was a recognition of what we now think of as e-commerce and the online shopping revolution. So I heard Michael say once that he was walking in the woods with his dogs, with the prospect of having to go to a supermarket and thinking how tiring it was to have to go and do that, and weren't there better ways to arrange our lives. And Michael came up with the idea of having a simple menuing system on a domestic television where a shopper could choose what they wanted from which shop. I think there were only a list of 3 shops available at the time, but in recognising that online shopping would be something that would kind of liberate people from some of the things that they might not want to do. And then in trialling it with the initial trial was for a council-funded project to help people with limited mobility. So he saw it also as a social benefit, something that would help the world, not just free us up from chores.
Or help us spend more money.
Or help us spend more money, yes.
And it didn't really catch on though. I mean, it's a brilliant idea. It's something that we all do all the time. We take it completely for granted, and yet his path to it didn't catch on. Why do you think that was?
Well, Michael, like many visionaries, was looking at something to come and playing with what there was in the world at the time. So Michael used the television set and a teletext interface that was limited in what it could do, and only made sense in the trial he put together, in the prototype he put together. It made sense because it was for a very specific purpose, someone who was housebound. He recognised what we would all be doing in the future, but it was more like a proof of concept. It was an idea that he worked out. Beyond an idea, he worked out how to actually do it, but the world wasn't ready for that equipment at that point.
That happens, doesn't it? That the technology can be there, but we're not, as people, the way we interact with technology hasn't developed yet.
Yes, very, very much. I mean, there's a real tension between what people want and what technology can do for them, and often the two aren't quite in sync. So there are many things that we might want to do, perhaps something like virtual reality, but at the moment it doesn't feel quite right, putting a big box on our head. But people like Michael are thinking 2 steps ahead. How will this work? How can we do it? And sometime in the future we all come to say, oh, it's so obvious. Why wouldn't we do online shopping? But in the era when Michael was doing it with the technology that was available, the world wasn't quite ready for his ideas.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you sort of we think, oh, it's all I mean, I remember in the early days of my career in television, we were like, it'll be great, we can react to the audience, we can give the audience exactly if they could say, oh, I want this to happen, and we could make the film follow the narrative that the audience want, and yet that hasn't really happened. No one's really pulled that off properly.
Absolutely. What's that? Transmedia.
That sort of reactivity, which should be so easy,
yes,
sort of still hasn't really happened. And then you end up with cats playing the piano. Is that really the pinnacle of our, digital achievements?
Well, I think that there are some ways in which that has and hasn't happened. So I think that the world in which we thought about a transmedia plot in which a story programme would be determined by the audience, it turns out most people would rather be told a good story and enjoy hearing what the author intended for the ending. But then when we think about YouTube and the tens of thousands of hours of video that's uploaded every minute by people, we all have our own stories to tell. They're just fragmented and not necessarily something that one would sit and watch for a whole evening. And I think we are seeing in the balance between user-generated content, the things that people upload onto YouTube to share with their friends or just because they have the creative drive, and yet we still have a need for big stories that we all know where it's going to go and we're all excited by sharing in the outcome. Maybe more so than ever as we become a global audience, so that the really big stories like Star Wars or the Disney franchises or the Marvel Comics characters, where whether you're a child in China or Sub-Saharan Africa or Tunisia or New York or London, we all sort of recognise these characters and the stories that they're telling for us.
Brilliant.
That was off topic, wasn't it?
That was a bit off topic, but it's
You
all
asked.
good. I did ask.
I'm doing some research with a colleague into transmedia.
Interesting.
He worked for BBC Worldwide, and he still really believes that one day big plots will be directed by the audience. I
sort
don't.
of crowd-funded plot.
Crowdfunding plots or voting with sort of should she die or should she live? Personality. I don't. I think he's wrong, but I think it's very interesting.
But I've been talking about that for 15 years.
Yeah, yes.
And the problem is that to make it look good and to tell it properly, it takes time, and there's a lag then between. There's immediacy, isn't it? How do you turn around the production quick enough and edit it and put music on it and special effects?
Do any of your children play console games, Xboxy type things, or PlayStation? Don't know.
No.
Because there, I mean, CGI does mean that one can have things that look absolutely almost like high television. Well, really like
and
high
then you
television.
choose what happens.
Yeah, every step you take is directed by the user.
All the options are there already, though, aren't they?
No, not necessarily.
Oh,
With
really?
something like Grand Theft Auto, it's a world in which you literally can say, I'm just going to become a taxi driver. I'll throw the taxi driver out of the taxi. I'll get into the taxi.
But the taxi exists.
The taxi exists, yes.
And the programming must exist to allow you to do that.
But something like Minecraft allows the child to make the taxi. You literally could get some blocks and say, I'll make a taxi, and I'll get in it, and I'll drive around. But there isn't a story. It's something different, I think.
Yeah.
It's something different from what television programmes and films offer to an audience.
You're all right, Mark.
To get water.
Yeah, you go. It's really interesting.
So I'm interested to know if we've got a second just about the idea that you said for 15 years you've thought, and I think quite a lot of people in television production have felt that is the way it's going. Certainly my colleague Stuart, who works for BBC Worldwide, he's absolutely feels that there was this group of people who knew this could be done, and yet the bloody audience just aren't interested. They haven't picked it up, or it hasn't happened, or something. So is it like almost like a frustration?
No, it's not really. It's just that also the problem is the people that pay for the television aren't visionaries.
No.
The commissioners aren't visionaries generally.
Yeah.
They're generally people that worry about ratings and audience figures and advertising revenues, and so they're not risk takers.
Yeah.
So they want to do what was the same as was a bit successful last year. So it's
with a bell on.
self-perpetuating
Yes.
a little bit,
So
which is what makes Big Brother so interesting.
Well, I was just going to say, I'll be really interested to see
We're
the
moving
segment.
into the Big Brother segment now. Come on, let's go for it. So, do you remember Big Brother coming on the television, and what were you doing at the time, and was it relevant to your work?
Yeah, I remember Big Brother coming on television. It was not something that I watched for my own entertainment, but as a change in the way that we perceived the use of the internet and the possibilities. I thought it was very, very exciting. It was like a taste of the future that maybe now we all live in, because Big Brother was broadcast with lots of media coverage, but the thing that was really unusual about Big Brother was they had cameras running 24/7, and the viewers could choose via the internet to look at whatever they chose to look at. And I can remember working in a technology company in London in the late 90s when it was first showing, where the internet slowed down because so many people were watching streaming video. It was this idea that ordinary life could be shared, and that it was interesting, whether it was watching someone take a shower, which I must admit a fair amount of my colleagues got quite excited at the prospect of, or just the outtakes of the conversation, the minute by minute lived experience, which I think now we're used to the idea that YouTube allows us to share whatever bits of video that we capture in our daily moments on our smartphones. But when Big Brother first aired, the idea that we could, in a web browser, just watch ordinary people doing ordinary things and find it interesting was really revolutionary, really was indicative of that change that maybe that Michael Aldrich had foreseen some 10 or more years earlier, from somebody making a programme and showing it to us picking the little bits that interested us and selecting and almost editing in the moment our own, what we see as reality.
And watching it whenever you wanted.
Whenever you wanted, wherever you wanted. We couldn't watch it on a mobile phone at that point, but yes, whenever you wanted.
If the internet was good enough.
Yes, if the internet speed wasn't ruined.
Slightly off the topic now, but that we've been talking about, but universities I'm talking about Brighton now specifically,
Mm-hmm.
about the sort of the role the universities, and in particular obviously Brighton University, plays in the local economy, in the digital economy. I've been talking to Phil Jones at Wired Sussex.
Yes.
We're going to interview him on Thursday. And I've also spoken to a woman called Rosemary French, who's part of something called the Gatwick Diamond.
Oh yes, yeah.
You
I
know,
know the Gatwick Diamond
that
initiative we're involved in.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, I suppose for us making this programme for the South East, and it's in the South East, is what role do you think your students, your work plays in kind of keeping that, refreshing that pool of talent and keeping the ideas going, really?
I'm glad you've asked me about that, because I think universities really have an important role in society. Universities both create new knowledge through research, but they also develop the capability to use knowledge. And I think the University of Brighton, with its idea of practical wisdom, is trying to really find ways to help students develop skills that will allow them to work well in the world of the 21st century, but also prosper and survive as people in this fast changing world. So the idea of work is changing very rapidly, and students who study topics like, I teach digital marketing, so I'm teaching them about how the internet is used to market and communicate, but what that means is changing day by day and week by week. And so to study now is not to come out with a set of ready-made answers to ready-made questions, but to develop a sense of questioning and exploring, which internet technologies have made it more possible than ever before to find answers for ourselves and to create and share those answers. So at the University of Brighton, we're very keen on the idea of developing a sort of professional sense of exploration. And I think that was one of the wonderful things about Michael Aldrich's contribution to the University of Brighton. He was a patron and a governor there for many years. He paid for our library, which is a standard way of saying, here's a lot of knowledge that you can explore as students. But he also gave us an online archive of all his business resources, which I get my students to explore when they want to understand how the internet is changing the way that work and life is. I get them to look back at the work Michael was doing in the late 70s and early 80s and use examples from the past to perhaps try and understand better what the future might look like.
And do you think there is a symbiosis between the sort of local digital economy and the higher education institutions, particularly in our area? Because it's, you know, it's a rich pool of talent, isn't it? And a lot of them stay in Brighton after they graduate. Yes,
I think that Brighton's in a very exciting and quite unusual position. It has the highest number of graduates living in a city of any city in the UK, and that sometimes is confusing because Brighton doesn't necessarily have big industries, but what it has is a really vibrant creative and digital sector. And the students I teach, where I'm teaching them things like digital marketing and e-commerce, they want to stay in Brighton, and there are firms that are linking the creative industries and the digital sector, often very small organisations working in networks, which is very much the way that the working world is likely to go. People working for themselves as part of a network. Brighton has a really unusual economy of a high number of arts graduates as well as those with technical skills in computing or things like digital marketing. And there's been quite exciting research done onto what's known as the fuse, which is the idea that there's a fusion between the creative industries and the technical and digital industries. And Brighton and the South East seems to really have a very vibrant set of connections between those who want to come up with creative ideas, maybe visionary ideas, and those who know how to build the things that will deliver it. So it's those two things, isn't it? It's being an ideas person, like Michael Aldrich was, yes, and having a pool of people that you can call on to make them happen. Yes, I think that idea that universities help people come out ready to realise their ideas, whether it's coming up with creative concepts or finding the skills to build and make systems that could deliver online shopping or digital entertainment, that Brighton really has quite a unique combination of. Great. Really good. Was that jingoistic enough? That was good. That was very good. I do think Brighton's got lots going for it. Yeah, we should mention the fuse. That was good.
Yeah, Fuse. That'll be Phil. Phil Jones will be talking about that. No doubt.
Good. Yeah.
We're getting a lot of that in. I think that's everything. Is there anything I haven't?
You didn't ask about old
smart
television and Logie Baird, although I don't know much about it, and but
Right,
I thought you,
you're right.
you mentioned that
was
you
one of my
might have
things.
wanted some sort
so
of.
I've got a few little thoughts here, which is.
And are we going to mention 3D cinema as a throwaway line? Brian's just so vibrant with new ideas.
Yeah,
Yeah,
3D cinema
didn't make it into the
make
mix.
it.
Nah, fair enough.
Whoa! It's just that it might be time to go. The whole thing's falling.
Sure,
apart.
yeah.
No, I'm joking. So,
Set's falling.
I think what would be great is if you could just sort of explain to me how television has changed, sort of over the years, and and become more interactive. I mean, you've sort of done it because we talked a little bit about time shifting and second screen. People
having multiple screens in the home.
Like not just more than one telly, but sitting in front of the telly with another screen is a thing as well.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Much more. So again, nothing that you could have, I would have predicted.
No, no one would have anticipated.
So if you could just sort of, sort of a whistle-stop tour through our relationship with the TV screen, that would be great.
Yes. So one of the things we've really seen is a very rapid revolution of how humans relate to screens. If we think of the earliest televisions, when the television was first invented, it was a single picture that flickered in front of us and we had no choice about it. It was on or off, and that was what was broadcast. And through the century that has just ended, we've seen that change from something where there's a single programme to channels to choose from, to cable and hundreds of channels to choose from. And then the advent of things like video recording and hard disk recorders have meant that we can choose when we watch the programmes. DVD and Blu-ray has meant that we can choose where in the world they come from and what the content is. And now we live in a world where everyone has their own screen, and we see a typical home might have a big television that a family are watching, but each of the family members has their own screen to interact with, possibly to comment on what they're watching, or to plan what they're going to do before or afterwards, maybe to do their homework on while they're watching, or maybe to watch something entirely separate at the same time. And we've seen a real fragmentation and enrichment of how the screen is used both to consume and to interact and to create. So the idea that those same screens are also able to make photographs of ourselves in the moment, video clips of things that interest us, comments and responses to things, has switched television from being something that we just receive to being something where we're maybe all co-creators in a sort of rich web of pictures and video that we can choose from.
Brilliant. That was great. That was really, really good.
I didn't pause for breath.
That's fine.
You have to just cut the bit that you need out of that.
That was really great. Yeah, and I think it's that thing is that we always thought, I suppose, final thought would be that television was a sort of one-way conversation to begin with, and has been for a long time. And actually it still sort of is, but it's the other screens that we can broadcast. Effectively, you could broadcast onto Facebook or YouTube live at any moment.
Yes.
And it's completely democratic. You don't have to have money or a studio or be the BBC or have permission.
And for a significant audience now, what's being broadcast by the mainstream television channels may not be what they are engaged with. For many people, video loggers and user-generated content is their substantial viewing experience. So the democratization of what we watch and who creates it has really switched the picture around from one where there's a single television where we're all watching it to one where everyone in front of the television is able to be creating the same sort of content, almost at the same sort of quality. Or shouldn't I say that to a professional television producer?
It's true. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Done? Well, thank you.